Hey, dude.
What's up?
Oh, not much. Just got off the phone with a client.
Hmm.
I've got this idea of price in my mind whenever I'm talking to a client, like how many hours I think something will take and how much I need to make off it. So this client was talking about the video series they want to do, and I was like, okay, in my head, I'm like, that'll be about $1,500 to get it done. Added in a bit of like profit in my mind, and I said to him, yeah, it'll be about somewhere between $1,800 and $2,000. And he comes back to me and goes, "Oh, that's awesome. The last I've done video projects with like 5 other companies, and they were all $5,000 plus. So I've anchored this price in my head. This is what I need to make, but maybe I'm missing out on pricing that's already there in the market."
What do you think that is?
Well, it's probably an anchoring bias.
This show is all about honesty and authenticity. If I'm being honest, I wouldn't pay you a thing to do a thing. But anyways, well, welcome to Second Story, everybody. Welcome to Second Story, everybody. This has become a show where all we do is just talk about our problems. It's therapy, but instead of us paying however much a therapist costs, I would imagine several $100s an hour, we're just talking to each other. I'm talking to another man who knows nothing about nothing, and you're talking to me, and I don't know shit about shit.
Yeah, hopefully someone puts something in the comments, like someone that knows something about something puts it in the comments.
Yeah. Someone put a comment yesterday on TikTok that I thought was hilarious, and I thanked them for it. They said, this was on one of our videos. It was prominently you. They said, they said, in order to buy podcasting equipment, you should need a license. And I was like, yeah, yep, good one. I was like, thanks for your comment. It's nice to know that we're reaching people that are not our friends. So I was, I thought it was hilarious.
That's very good.
Yeah. I kind of wanted to call him, status, but whatever. Yeah. Can you imagine occupational licensing and podcasting? There's 3 podcasts that exist. It's basically just the corporate media.
So he was just saying we're like amateur hour and shouldn't be doing this.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what he was getting at.
Yeah. Yeah, so I thanked him, like any good pro. I thanked him for his comment, and I appreciated that he watched the video and drove our numbers. So, anyways,
Yeah.
I love that we're getting trolled now. It tells us that we're kind of over the target, which is kind of cool.
Yes, sir. We're
Yeah.
in the 1%.
We are in the 1%. Actually, we're in the 0.1%, I believe, of all-time podcasts. Yeah, we're 1% of the 1%, or something like that. I don't know.
Because we made over 21 episodes.
Yeah. So at the top of the show, I mostly wasn't listening to what you said, but I heard you use the word anchor. So are we talking about boats today or what?
No, like what I was talking about was anchoring and pricing when it comes to business.
Okay. All right. I kind of figured that. You're talking about the anchoring effect, or the anchor. Sometimes it's referred to, I think, as the anchor bias.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
That is something that everybody deals with, and most people don't even realize they're dealing with it, that they have a bias that they're anchored to that comes from kind of their first introduction to something in life. So maybe we should start just by explaining what an anchor bias is, because I don't think it's a common term or a common thing that gets used. So yeah, people call it an anchor bias or an anchor effect, but basically what it is it's a cognitive bias that will cause somebody to favor certain information that they get early. So kind of the first introduction to information, that sort of is held over them as they go through decision-making processes. So that's why it's called an anchor, because you hold on to it and kind of it acts as like a reference point for you when you're making decisions. And it's actually very tough to move away from that anchor bias, even though you receive additional information. So this is sort of like your first introduction to information, and you just hold on to it, and it's like a self-belief that you always hold on to, even though you might be introduced to a ton of information that tells you that it's wrong. Is that a good,
right?
That's a good summary of that?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because I think it falls into a lot of different areas, right?
Oh, dude, for sure. Yeah, you just brought up it's in your business. It's in people's work. It's in their, their morals, their beliefs, their political beliefs, for sure. It's in how we shop, how we buy our homes, how we buy our cars, how we do everything, basically, how we act as a consumer. It's a big part of it too. And yeah, I think it's important to point out that there are both like external anchors and internal anchors, right? So like an external
Okay.
anchor would be something that it's like a reference point that someone else gives you. So like maybe it's a teacher, or maybe it's like the media, or a politician, or it's kind of suggested, or it's like the suggested retail price in a store. And then there's the
Yep.
internal anchor, which is basically based on your own experience, your own belief system, um, I don't know, whatever context your life might provide to you. That would be your internal anchor bias.
Which also comes from external sources. I mean,
Yeah.
nothing that ends up internal with us in our feelings and thoughts and all that hasn't come from somewhere.
Yeah, it's true. And a lot of times, like especially early when you're introduced to things, you might be introduced to something and then you're immediately introduced to something that like confirms this anchor belief immediately. So
Yeah.
this happens a lot. I mean, I can remember being young and having these types of things happen as I was sort of an impressionable kid and teenager and stuff like that. But yeah, for sure. I think we should point out that like once you are anchored by a certain belief, it's very hard to adjust. Like it's
Hmm.
extremely hard. And like ultimately adjusting is like you're essentially admitting you were wrong. You're admitting a mistake. And we still live in a day and age where people have a really hard time admitting like I was wrong or I made a mistake or, whatever it might be. And it's kind of funny. I'm stealing your term when I say it's kind of funny, but you look around in society and there's so many people who still walk around so wrong about something because they're just holding on to their anchor bias. And we can get into examples later on, but I'm sure people, if they're listening to this, they can probably think of a few just off the top of their heads. So from the article, not from me. The anchor effect is a cognitive process that can influence your judgment and decisions. Understanding its sway can help improve your decision making and your mental health. Hey, we talk a lot about that on this show. In today's
Hmm.
information saturated world, our brains often use shortcuts to process and make decisions. One such shortcut is the anchoring effect, also known as the anchor bias. The anchoring effect is a natural cognitive process, but it can skew the way you interpret information and make decisions. This can significantly impact your overall well being, especially mentally. With a little practice, you can take some practical steps to mitigate the influence of anchor bias and make more informed decisions. That last line,
Hmm.
make more informed decisions. That essentially, like learning sort of the error of your ways, learning from your mistakes, which is a lot of what the theme of this show is. Ultimately, learning is becoming a better version of yourself. You would hope that you learn, good behaviors, good habits, that sort of thing. And you talk about that last line where they said, with a little practice, you can take some practical steps to mitigate the influence of the anchor bias and make more informed decisions. It is not an easy thing to shake.
No, like even as a consumer, right? Buying a product or something like that.
Hmm.
Um, One of the things I like to do is read all the negative reviews.
To shake your anchor bias or to create one.
Not to create one, more to go to look at what they're complaining about, like,
Mm,
you know, shipping took too long or whatever it is, right? Like try to see what they're actually complaining about that gave that 1-star review,
yeah,
right? Like package showed up a little damaged. Well, that's not really the product,
yeah.
right? That's the shipping company
Ace Ventura delivered it.
probably. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
Yeah. So yeah, I do try to look at those reviews. And then yeah, YouTube, like going on like YouTube and watching reviews on products too. Problem is there a lot of the times they are like a paid,
yeah,
they've got an affiliate link or some reason that they're like promoting that product, or they've only used it for a week,
yeah,
something like that, and then did a review to get their numbers up on their YouTube channel.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, those paid YouTube people. Anyways, let me get back to my Dell computer here. I'm kidding. I use a Mac. All right. So I haven't read this article, by the way. This is just one I pulled up. So I'm not exactly sure if it's going to touch on that, but that might be something we circle back to. So let's off the top. What's the anchoring effect? The anchoring effect, also known as the anchor bias, is a psychological phenomenon in which people rely too heavily on the first piece of information they hear. It's a much better descriptor than I used. Uh, Way more succinct. In other words,
Hmm.
if you hear a certain fact or number, aka the anchor, it can strongly influence your subsequent judgments or decisions, explains Haley Hicks, a licensed clinical social worker in Dallas, Texas. For instance, if you see a shirt priced at $100 and then you see a similar one for 40, you might consider the second shirt to be a bargain, influenced by the initial anchor price of $100. Jeff Lundgren, a psychotherapist in Mill Creek, Utah, adds that with the anchoring bias, the initial data point influences subsequent judgments and decisions, even if the anchor is irrelevant or misleading. Woo!
Hmm.
We don't have any
Interesting.
misleading information in this day and age. We'll finish this point and then we'll jump into it. So, a 2022 study
Okay.
of the anchoring effect of consumers' price judgment found several factors had a significant impact on the anchoring effect. These include gender. Female consumers were more strongly influenced by anchoring effect than male consumers. Big Five personality is another effect. Includes open, conscientious, extrovert, agreeable, and neurotic personalities. Expert knowledge and skill. Familiarity of consumers with a product, kind of what you were touching on, getting familiar, obviously. Cognitive needs, so a willingness to proactively think when judging unknown matters. And then finally, self confidence level, the degree to which a person is convinced by their own judgment. So maybe we'll take these apart. So
Okay.
basically, the several factors that impact the anchoring effect. First one's gender, so male versus female. Female consumers more strongly influenced by an anchoring effect than male consumer. That's kind of strange, I think.
Do you?
Yeah, what do you think that is?
Because they shop more.
Fair, okay. Yeah, they do mention it's female consumers, right? They're not saying like this
Yeah.
is part of everyday life. I actually, I don't know if people will agree with me on this, but like, let's just take away the consumer aspect of it and just say females versus males. Would you say, in your opinion, who's more open-minded, women or men? In general, like not talking specifically about anyone.
It's hard to say.
It is hard to say, right?
Yeah.
I I think women, just because of like the women I know in my life, are more open-minded than the men.
Okay.
Um, so when it comes to like an anchor bias, I feel like outside of consumerism, I think women are less like again, this is my own experience, this is my own anchor bias. Um, I think at least in my sphere, women are less swayed kind of by their anchor bias. Like they're more willing to sort of give up on that, not by much. I think it's like a very very slim margin to say the least. But consumer side
Hmm.
of things, I think you're right. The fact that women do shop more. Like my wife bought me this shirt, you know, bought me the
Yeah.
pants I'm wearing, bought me this hub,
Hmm.
bought me
I
pretty much
think I
everything.
think in general, right? Like you're not going out shopping for your kids backpacks and shoes and stuff. Probably. I'm
No,
once again just
absolutely not. I wouldn't.
just the women in my life tend to do that.
Hmm.
I wouldn't know what to buy.
I'd come home with a golf bag for my kids probably. Like, look how much space is in this thing.
Yeah, this hockey bag's got wheels on it.
Yeah, yeah, right. I
Yeah.
would probably. Look, it's cool. It's got a CCM logo on the side or something. I probably would do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Like it tends to be that they shop more. I mean, I went shopping last week, and I mean, here's an example of the anchor bias. I went shopping at Under Armour. They were having one of their 50% sales. I walked in. I was in the store for maybe 5 or 10 minutes. I looked at a pair of like kind of designer jogging pants. Like they were more stylish. I was like, oh, these are sweet. Like cool. And then I looked at the price, and it was $110, but it was 50% off. It was $55. And most people would be anchored to the, whoa, look at that. It was 110. Now it's 55. And I looked at people, and the store was packed, and people were buying insane amounts of Under Armour clothing. And I was
Yeah.
just like, not swayed by the $110 price because I was like, well, I can go down to Winners or Marshalls and get a pair of jogging pants for like $30, probably Under Armour too. So I wasn't swayed by
Yeah.
that, but I looked around at like the masses, and so many people were swayed because they saw the 110 and they went, "Whoa, these were 110 and now they're 55. What a great deal."
I'm even worse than that. I'll look at the price, even if it was $30, and then go, I'll just wear the ones with the holes in them at home.
Wear them until they get too many holes that your phone starts falling out of the pocket.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, that's right.
yeah, I
Yeah.
could see that. Yeah, I mean, I look at this one, gender. I think it's pretty straightforward. Like women shop more for the family, for themselves, for their husbands, for everyone. So they're just, I think they see more, so they're probably more likely to be swayed by an anchor bias when it comes to consumerism.
Yeah, I mean, there's been plenty of times where my wife's come home and it's like, "Oh, I got this on sale." And then I look at it and I'm like, "Yeah, I don't know. Is that really is it really a good deal?" Like, I used to work in management for a cell phone company, and we would buy phone chargers for $3
Nice.
and we'd sell them for 30, right? So I kind of have a bit of an insight on like how much retail actually costs. So
Hmm.
I don't know clothing, but I would assume clothing actually doesn't cost that much to make. And I know for a fact that the stores buy the stuff from uh, wholesale at 50%. So they already buy it at 50% of the price,
Hmm.
which has already been marked up, right? So um, yeah, there's definitely price gouging out there, and things do not cost as much to make as they're selling it for. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, we know some people who own like beer companies and stuff like that, distilleries, that kind of thing. And I won't get into the specifics of the numbers, but when you hear what it costs to actually make a beer and can it, and then how much that the company actually gets versus how much goes into comes from taxes and things like that. Yeah, like stuff is
how
way
much?
cheaper. Yeah, it's so little. It's like the one I'm thinking of when I talked. This is years ago, but they were like, "Yeah, we get 75 cents a can." I was like, "Woof!"
Hmm.
like this is, I think, start of the pandemic or just before, but it was like,
It's probably even lower now because I think the tax went up on beer.
oh yeah, okay,
So
there you go. So they were getting 75
yeah,
cents a can, and like it was being charged at the beer store was like 3.75. So it's like
yeah.
substantial markup. But anyways, yeah, anchor bias and consumerism uh, goes to the females, more likely at least. The next one was a big five personality. So this includes open, conscientious, extrovert, agreeable, and neurotic personalities. So they are more impacted by the anchor bias. I could see this. The open one kind of surprises me though. Like if you're an
Which
open
one?
personality, so they say the big five personality: open, conscientious, extrovert, agreeable, and neurotic. Most of those I can
O-
understand.
Open meaning like just
Well,
you're
I mean, they
open to
don't,
things.
yeah, like I would think you'd be open to like having your mind changed. That's the way I view it. Like if you're
Okay.
open-minded, that's the way I kind of see it. Like, oh, you're, you know,
Those
yeah.
people are more susceptible to it. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
surprising to me. The other ones like conscientious, extrovert, agreeable, neurotic, like neurotic and agreeable, I could see how you would be swayed by the anchor bias. Um,
Agreeable for sure, yeah.
yeah,
Because like, if someone says, "Yeah, this is what it is," they're gonna be like, "Okay, yeah, I agree."
yeah, yeah, yeah. And
Right?
then, yeah, it becomes interesting later on though, because if you get introduced to stuff you don't agree with, then you would think it would kind of shatter your anchor
Right.
bias a little bit. So I'm not necessarily 100% on that one. It is a little strange. Conscientious, yeah, I could see it. Extrovert, yeah. I mean, I kind of get why that would be somebody who'd have an anchor bias too. Neurotic for sure is
Mhm.
an easy one. Why they would have an anchor bias, especially what they're introduced to at a young age. I could see them being like very passionate about the things that they learn at, at first.
Yeah. Well, and an extrovert, like, they're more likely to kinda spout off their opinions, right? And their opinions are coming from those anchors, like, no matter
True.
what it is, media or whatever. So
Hmm. Yeah, that's true. Makes sense. The next one, expert knowledge and skill. So familiarity of consumers with the product. Again, back to the consumer thing.
Mm-hmm.
So they are, see, I could see why this would be. So if you use a product pretty regularly, like let's just say you buy a product, you use it and you like it. People are very passionate about sticking to what they like. It's the reason that people eat like 5 meals. Why they
Mm-hmm.
eat the same cereal for 20 years. Why they, drink the same beer. Like you look at people, a lot of my friends, they drink one type of beer. And it's
Yeah.
always been it's the beer they drank when they were like 19. They're like, "Wow, I love MGD. It's what I've always drank." It's like, dude, there's like 1,100 beers out there that you can buy. Try it.
I love OV. This is what I used to steal from my stepdad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, try a different one. But yeah, like familiarity of consumers with the product, expert knowledge and skill. If I mean, I get it in a way because if you do find something that you really like that is a good product, um, you tend to just want to buy it because you maybe don't trust other things. But that's what the anchor bias is, right? If you only ever bought
Yeah.
Nike shoes, like that's what you bought all your life and they've always been good to you, then why would you try and buy Adidas or why would you buy, a pair of Pumas or whatever? Um,
Yeah.
Now that I'm thinking about this, I really have a lot of anchor bias when it comes to this, but there are certain things that I really don't. I'll give you an example. Growing up, did you use an Apple computer?
No, they didn't exist, I don't think.
They existed, barely.
It was like,
The company was
yeah,
falling
they were,
apart.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
Especially when I was born. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. In the 60s, they were really falling apart. Uh, so I didn't either. My dad was like, Apple's stupid, like that kind of. He was like PC all the way. So I grew up on PCs till I went to film school. So what was I?
Hmm.
That was 19 years ago. So I was 20. That was my first introduction to Mac products. And I was like, oh shit, like these are so much better. And immediately my anchor bias, my like, always using
Flipped.
PC gone. Um,
Yeah.
and I mean, maybe this leans into the
But
first point.
now it's the other way. You're anchored into
Yeah, but it
into
wasn't the
Apple
first thing I
products,
was.
right?
That's not an anchor bias though. It wasn't the first thing I was introduced to. First thing
Oh, I
was
see.
yeah. So, but I think of a lot of things like through my life, especially when it comes to products. Almost all my anchor biases have been shattered, but I'm somebody who's very open to being wrong about something and like trying to correct it and find the best thing for me. Um, so like when I was a kid, my dad always bought Fords, and then eventually
Hmm.
they started to not work out for him, so he switched and he kind of shattered his own anchor bias. Um, so like I guess men are more open when it comes to consumer products, at least now that I'm starting to think about it, for sure consumer products, but um I think that's just like experience, like just using things. And eventually, if something is constantly falling apart or you're having to replace it or buy it all the time, it does shatter your bias. Do you have an
Yeah.
example of that with products?
Yeah, we're both using Shure microphones right now because we see all the podcasters using them,
That's true. Yeah.
right? We don't
Yeah.
have the real expensive ones, but we have the
They're pretty expensive.
yeah.
Yeah, I guess that would be an anchor bias. I mean, I don't know. I've bought other microphones. They were all terrible though.
Yeah,
Yeah.
true.
But yeah, really with products, there's just I can think of a long list of things where I had to switch because they were just the products started to not be great. And like diet, like when you're a
Mhm.
kid, you eat like shit basically, and you're anchored. I mean, through your teens, like for most people at least, into your like early 20s, you just eat garbage. You don't sleep properly. Those are all anchor bias. Like, oh, if I go to bed early, I'll miss things. And then eventually you
Yeah.
get older, you're like, well, I guess, it might be good if I go to bed by 10, or, it might be good if I eat a salad every once in a while. And you start to kind of shatter those, but you do hold on to the anchor bias of like, I don't want to miss stuff, so I don't want to go to bed early. It's a really hard thing to shake.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so the next one's cognitive need, and this is the willingness to proactively think when judging unknown matters.
Say that again. Repeat that again.
Yeah, here, perfect example, you. Uh, Cognitive need, so a willingness to proactively think when judging unknown matters. So again, they're talking about A 2022 study of the anchoring effect of consumers' price judgment found several factors had an impact on the anchoring effect. These include, and again, cognitive need, so willingness to proactively think when judging unknown matters. So basically, this is, are you actually thinking about what it is that you're doing? So in the case of consumerism, are you actually thinking about what you're buying? Or are you just mindlessly wandering and buying things?
Yeah. So, yeah, in stores, I find they'll put on a rack, you'll go in to look for something that you need,
Mm-hmm.
and there will be high price, mid price, and low price.
For sure.
And generally, you aim for that middle price one because you're like, I don't want to buy the low end piece of garbage thing, and I don't want to spend that much on the high end. So this middle one must be like the perfect. And they do that on purpose. They want you to go towards that middle thing. That's the product that they're hoping you're going to go after.
Yeah.
Yesterday, when I was thinking about us doing this episode, I went in to buy a yellow jacket trap, like a wasp trap.
Yep.
And I went to the shelf. The girl showed me where she's like, yeah, they're over here. And there was three. There's three prices. There was like a low price, a mid price, and a high price one. I was like, screw that. And I went and bought the like lowest priced one.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I put it out yesterday and it's not working.
Yeah. Well, that's not shocking. It's hard to say though. Like, is it not working because it was the cheapest or because you don't know what you're doing?
Maybe I put the wrong juice in there or something. Yeah.
Probably.
It's hard to say.
Yeah. No, you're right though. I often notice that in stores that they have it set up like that. And if you ever watch people in the grocery store go up to the cash, I'm always interested in who walks up to the cash and buys the items that are at the cash, because those tend to be the worst value, right? They're impulse buys.
I always buy a pack of gum.
Yeah, you idiot. They put it up there because it's the worst value. And I always find it amazing who goes up there. Like, people will go buy a case of pop or something, and then they'll walk up and they'll see the fridge. Whoa, get another one. And it's like, you can't wait 20 minutes to go home and just put ice in a glass and pour. No, I got to spend $2.50 or $2.49 or whatever on this bottle of pop because I need it now. Like, that's kind of what they're talking about. Like, you're not really thinking things through there. You're just acting on impulse, and there's no like proactive thinking that goes into it. And I mean, that they know that a lot of people do that will walk through the stores and just, brainlessly throw things into the cart. That's what's good about like the order getting the order picking service. You don't do that kind of thing, like impulse buy.
Have you ever noticed that like you go to Costco or something like that, and they have those aisles of like, I don't know, healthy protein bars and stuff like that. And it'll say like, 28 grams of protein in these bars. And if you just, and I've seen people just grabbing those and they're like, I need these.
Yeah.
But if you look at the back, it's like, it's 28 grams of protein, but it's 32 grams of sugar.
Yeah. I see those all the time.
So like, but not too many people actually take the time to turn it over and look, because they're just like, I need protein. I'm being healthy. I'm going to just grab this thing. And I know it's a quick thing for me to eat. Right.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that falls under the bias, but I think it definitely falls under laziness.
It fits under cognitive need for sure, because you're not actually proactively thinking about. You're just like, oh, protein. Yeah, Hormozy said I need that. Better go get it.
That's
Better
right.
go get it. Yeah,
yeah,
it's true. I've seen so many people like there's a few of the bars where it is. They're like 20 grams of protein, but it's like 24 grams of sugar, and you're like, damn, like that ain't worth it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think we talked about this before, but like cereal, right? Like we were definitely instilled in the 80s, this bias that, breakfast is the most important meal and cereal is the breakfast of choice.
Yeah. Healthy. Healthy
right?
cereal.
Like we had the Olympic athletes were eating cereal, right? Like it was this Olympic athlete likes this, they like Wheaties, right? But yeah, we had this bias all along. And then it wasn't until I was like way old, like probably in my 30s, I was like, wait, what? Cereal's bad for you?
Yeah.
Fruit juice, not good?
Orange juice is bad? but
Yeah,
it's so
orange juice
sweet and
has sugar
delicious.
in it.
Yeah, so
I thought it was
delicious.
just oranges.
Yeah. Breakfast might be
Yeah,
the most egregious example of where they kind of the anchor bias hits you with, yeah, your diet. I mean, yeah, it's probably the one where they deceived people the most. Bread, I mean, part of the food
yeah,
group, you know,
yeah,
or
yeah.
the
The food,
food
the
pyramid,
food group.
food
Yeah,
pyramid, the four food groups. Yeah, you need your bread.
right.
Need it. Yeah, that's a man. When you talk to people and you shatter their worldview on that, on food especially, like people are when people figure out that like certain things are not healthy that they've been doing food wise, it's like, whoa, that's where you get a lot of lashing out and anger and stuff.
Yeah,
Kind of like, yeah, there's very few
muff
things that people are that passionate about.
muffins.
Oh yeah, muffins.
That's an easy, quick grab breakfast, right?
Yeah.
But muffins are you're eating a cupcake for breakfast.
Yeah,
Like
basically.
it's you're basically eating a cake
Yeah.
without the icing for breakfast. Sometimes it does have icing, you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, the cream cheese icing. Yeah. Super healthy.
Just eat your cake for breakfast and go on with your day.
Yeah. All right, so the last part of the five is self-confidence levels. So the degree to which people are convinced of their own judgment.
Okay.
Those are the people who tend to hold on to anchor biases. Um, yeah, I have a term for these that I mean I didn't make this term up, but I use it quite often. Um, midwit. If you know what a midwit is, do you know what a midwit is?
You've used it before, but explain it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean I'll get the technical term up for it, but midwit is basically somebody who's slightly above average intelligence, who is so locked into their own superiority that they actually are wrong about a lot of things. Let's find midwit.
Mm.
Let's get the dictionary definition here. A person of middling intellect, someone who is neither dumb nor particularly intelligent, but they act as if they're smarter than they are.
Oh, so like you.
Yes. Oh, I'm for sure a midwit. Are you kidding me? Slightly above average intelligence. Yeah, here's how Urban Dictionary describes it. Not that this is a great source, but it's funny. Described by Vox Day as individuals of above average intelligence, yet not far from average. Generally found in the 105 to 120 IQ range. So, I mean, the average is like 90 for IQ, I think, or 95 or something like that. But
Yeah.
yes, this is somebody who's slightly above average intelligence who believes that they're super smart.
Yeah.
Anyone come to mind? We're not going to name names, but anyone in your life or that you've met in your past that you can think of that would fit this?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I've got a few friends that are definitely like stuck on their biases for sure. Like
Are they midwits? You should
yeah.
call them that. See how it
Yeah.
goes.
Yeah. I'm going to start doing that.
Excuse me, midwit. Yeah. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, people that like believe in the moon landing, stuff like that. Crazy.
well, that's going to get us a flag on YouTube. Back to the article.
Hit it.
I find midwits to be particularly of interest because midwits run the world, basically. Like so many people will say, I don't, whether it's a company or whether it's like a politician or an actor, musician, whatever. Like obviously this doesn't apply to all of them, but there are so many in all of those industries where people will be like, I don't know how that person made it.
Mm-hmm.
Don't know how they made it. And a lot of times they're just a midwit. Somebody with slightly above average intelligence that was confident enough to go for it. Like they were so confident in their own superiority that they didn't let things like mistakes get in their way of rising to the top. Like they didn't let
Yeah.
things like being wrong about a bunch of stuff get in their way. And I
Yeah.
mean, you can
Just bulldoze through it.
yeah, I mean politics is a
Not even
perfect example.
apologizing.
No, they'll never even admit it. Politics is a
Yeah.
perfect example. There are so many politicians like I mean, just look at the last 5, 10, 20 years. There are so many who have been just wrong about everything and
Mm-hmm.
are still so confident in their own superiority.
Yeah.
There's a guy, what was his name? He's not a politician, but he was like a media. Oh, Bill Crystal. Do you know who Bill Crystal is?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I'm
So
picturing him.
yeah, so Bill Crystal is the perfect example of a midwit. For those who don't know, Bill Crystal used to be a political commentator. He was in politics as well. I forget his exact role, but he served under George Bush Sr., I believe. Anyways,
Okay.
Bill Crystal, you in the early 2000s, for those who don't know, he would be on the news, the typical corporate press, Fox, MSNBC, stuff like that. He would be on the news, and in the lead up to the first Iraq, or sorry, to Iraq War Two, he would make comments like the Iraq War is not going to last 8 months. He'd be like, it'll last maybe a couple months, maybe a few weeks. He's like, and he would like snicker and laugh, be like, it's not gonna last 8 months.
Yeah.
Well, we're 20 plus years later, and guess what? The Iraq War is still going on, and Bill Crystal
Yeah.
still gets spots on the news and in the corporate media, and still goes around on social media and everything, making predictions and acting like he's right all the time. So he is a perfect example of a midwit, somebody whose self confidence is so high despite a track record of being absolutely wrong so often. He's not letting something like that get in his way. So Bill Crystal is a perfect example of what we're talking about here with an anchor bias.
Yeah. And there's no accountability for someone like him. Like,
No.
they might get fired or something. Chris Cuomo's a recent one, right?
Yeah,
Like,
Chris Cuomo was a good one. Yeah, he's actually a
yeah,
really good one.
he did get let go, but he still anchors himself to all the like misinformation shit he was putting out there,
For
over the
years. Yeah,
last like yeah, for years.
it's true. Yeah, I
S-
mean,
Stands by it.
yeah. Well, for those who don't know, Chris Cuomo used to work for CNN. Chris Cuomo had a debate a couple months ago with another political commentator, Dave Smith, and it was one of the most one-sided, embarrassing things I've ever watched. And Chris Cuomo still has like
Mhm.
3 jobs in the media and goes around pretending to be right. So he's another good example of that. But the world is littered
Yeah.
with them, and the people who are largely successful are anchored to certain beliefs and nothing's going to change them. And one of them is self confidence. Like they are anchored to the belief that they are awesome and correct all the time. And it's a wild thing, but like I'm honestly like sometimes I get jealous of these people because I'm like, man, I wish I had that kind of belief in myself rather than being
Mhm.
someone who's like, no, I was wrong about this, I'm wrong about that, I'm wrong about most of the things I ever did. Like that's the
Yeah.
way.
Or
Yeah,
second guessing yourself, right? Like you second guess your decisions.
for sure. Yeah.
You think about them.
Yeah, I mean that's what it comes to, like the last point, willingness to proactively think when judging unknown matters. Yeah.
Mhm.
All right, so let's get into some anchoring effect examples. So these are more specific types of things, but the people from the article, so Hicks and Lundgren, share some of the real world examples of the anchoring effect. First one is real estate. We mentioned this off the top. So if a seller provides an artificially high listing price and then lowers it, you might think that you're getting a good deal on a property, even if it's still overpriced. The initial anchor price is what influences your decision making and not necessarily the current market value of the house.
Mm. Interestingly enough, though, sometimes when that happens, you go, "What's wrong with that house?"
When it doesn't sell.
No, like yeah, when they had it set at a certain price where it's like, "Hey, $600,000," and then they've lowered it to like 450. You're like, "What's wrong with it? Why is it sat on the market this long? Why are they lowering the price? Does it
Yeah,
have water damage?" Like
true.
you
Yeah.
start questioning some of those things, and maybe that's like a different bias that's coming in or something like that. But it can go the other way.
Sure, that's kind of people who are willing to, sh- I guess, shatter the anchor bias of the initial price and just think critically about it, like, oh, like what's going on here? And people do that. There are lots of people in the world who look at something and that, even going back to the clothes example, where they're like, oh, this was $50 and now it's 30. Is there a defect on it? Is there like a stain? What's wrong with it? And they'll kind of look it over rather than jumping at the deal. And that's sort of differentiates like the people between who do get married to an anchor bias and who are sort of willing to think critically about it and move on and change their opinion about things. So yeah, real
Right.
estate's a real good example for anyone who's ever negotiated in real estate. And we're going to talk about negotiations in a second, but for anyone who's ever gone house shopping, you one of the things you'll always look at is like how long has something been on the market too.
Hmm.
But people who get excited about like a price drop, and there are lots, They don't look necessarily at those things that you just talked about, like those other factors that come into play, like how many days has this been listed, what could potentially be wrong with it, what's a defect in this house, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
All right, so the next one, making negotiations. So in business and personal negotiations, the party who makes the first offer often sets the tone for the discussion. The initial number is an anchor that can sway the final agreement, even if the first offer is far from reasonable. So for example, in a job negotiation, if the employer gives you an initial offer that's too low, you might have a tendency to accept it or come up with a counter offer that's only slightly higher than the initial one. So even if you're
Hmm.
prepared to ask for a certain amount, the initial offer may set your expectations too low and influence you to accept a lower salary.
Yeah.
Well, let's dig into this
Yeah.
one because this one's very true.
Yeah. Chris Do talks a lot about this, just especially in business, about you being the first to anchor,
Hmm.
because if you let the client do that, um, they say we want to spend $1,000 or whatever, and you want to get 2,500. Now you're set at this 1,000, and you got to try to climb it up to 2,500 somehow. So Christo talks a lot about like getting your anchored price out there as quick as possible.
Yeah, I can see that in a negotiation because if somebody says 1,000 and then you come up and go five, I
Hmm.
mean, you 5x their price, they're probably like, well, nope. But if you started at
Yeah,
five, and it
yeah,
becomes harder for them to lowball you at 1,000. I kind of see where that
yeah,
could be. Like if you're the first one to sort of set the anchor, that's a really good
hmm,
negotiation tactic.
yeah. One of the things he suggests is actually coming up with ranges where you're like, are you they if basically you want to find out what their problem is, like what they need help with, but
Mhm.
then it's like, are you 5,000 to $15,000? Is this a 5,000 or 5 to $15,000 problem? Is it a 20 to $50,000 problem, or is it a 50 to $100,000 problem?
Yeah.
And you see where they land in the range, and then you've set your anchor in one of those ranges, right?
Yeah, that'd
But
be a good way.
you know that you're good. You're going to make the money at 5,000, right?
Yeah.
So,
That's really the way you should be negotiating in ranges like
yeah,
that. Yeah. With people like,
should be.
yeah, how good do you want this to look? Do you want it to look?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
Or, like when someone comes to you and says, I've got this problem I need to solve, and I need to advertise to get more people in the door, or whatever it may be. And they say, I've got $500 to spend. Well, is that a $500 problem for you? Or do you see this as because the $5,000 isn't going to get you enough to solve that problem of getting the people in the door,
Yeah.
right?
It's true.
Maybe you need to spend a little bit more to make a little more.
Hmm. Yeah, and that
So,
that certainly applies in business. One of the things that I think people really miss the mark or get anchored to when it comes to negotiation is obviously trying to find a new job or trying to find a job. A
mhm.
lot of times, so one of the things I try to avoid is not that I look for jobs anymore, but when I was looking for jobs, I would always try to avoid obviously ones that I felt paid too low, but I was like the opposite of most people. Most people would get upset when a job didn't have a price, like or a salary listed to it to be like, oh, like they're just gonna lowball me. But
Mhm.
I was actually the opposite, and I was of the opinion when I saw it, it was always low, first off. Like I always thought it was too low. So I didn't really have interest in those jobs because they've already set the anchor. Like there it is. I can't go in there
Yeah.
if they're offering 50 to 60,000 and go, well, I'm actually worth 90. They're gonna go,
Yeah.
okay, cool, go find that elsewhere. Because they've set their anchor,
Yeah.
right? And it's hard to
Yep.
negotiate away from that. Whereas a job that doesn't have it, where they actually ask you the question, like what would you take? I always found those more appealing because I could put what my anchor was. And I was always
Yeah.
like, I'm gonna put slightly higher than I would want because I know they're gonna try to negotiate this down. And that was the way I would play it. But I mean, to each their own,
How
but
do
that was just the
you
way I saw it.
how do you feel when a job's listed with a range where it's like, you know, uh 50,000 to 75,000 depending on your experience?
Oh yeah. Yeah, one of the
Is it
things I remember years ago being in an interview and they're like, this was like maybe 10 years ago. And they're like, well, we start you at this. but you can make if like later you can make this. And I remember I didn't say this, but I remember thinking in my head, I'm like, well, I'll just start later. I'll just, you know, I'll just start later when it's higher. Yeah. Yeah.
You should have said that to them.
I should have. I mean, it was an interview. It was,
Yeah.
yeah. I should have actually, because it was a job I didn't get. But that was kind of the way I approached it. I'm like, wow, I'll just start later.
Yeah. When do you want me to start to get that range?
Yeah. When do I have
Yeah.
to start to get that particular amount of money? Yeah. I'll start later.
Yeah.
It's true though. Like I don't like the range thing either because I always find it's too low too. And they always try to get you on the low end of the range as well versus
Mm-hmm.
the higher one. I just find it like anytime I've had to negotiate anything, I always like being the one to set what the anchor price is going to be. It just
Mm-hmm.
it works out more favorably for me. But anyways.
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk about the impacts of the anchoring effect because this actually impacts people's lives in a big way. A couple things in the article. We'll talk about some of our own because I'm sure you've got a few that actually impact you. So according to Lundgren, the anchoring effect isn't just an abstract psychological concept. It's got tangible impacts on an individual's overall well-being, can especially impact a person's mental health. So the first one, mental strain from the anchoring effect. So Lundgren explains that unrealistic expectations set by anchors can lead to dissatisfaction and stress. If someone anchors their self-worth on an unrealistic standard set by social media influencers, for example, it can lead to feelings of inadequacy. This actually kind of pisses me off. I agree that social media influencers do set an unrealistic standard for people, but you know who really does, or who really did for our generation and the generations behind us? Society. Like everybody.
I thought you were going to say boomers.
Well, boomers, yeah. Well, boomers for us. Yeah. Boomers for us for sure. But like your teachers, your guidance counselors, your like the media, the corporate media, right?
Mm-hmm.
Television shows, movies, musicians, like all of it. Basically all of society. Your parents, like your friends, everybody sets
Mm-hmm.
this unrealistic standard. So we can just go back to like our generation. If you go to college, you'll get a good job. If you don't, you'll be a failure.
Mm-hmm.
That was a standard that was set all through high school for me.
There was also this like you have to go to college the second you're done high school.
Yeah.
Which was a big mistake for me.
Me too.
I actually, when I worked at the bank, I was often telling kids that weren't sure if they wanted to go to school or not. Like kids that I was like doing their savings and that. The ones that weren't sure what they wanted to go through for, I'd talk to them about like taking a year off.
Mm-hmm.
Their parents didn't necessarily like me mentioning that to them, but
yeah, probably not.
but that was my experience, right? I went to college right out of high school. It did not go well. I took a couple years off and then I went back for something that was more meaningful
Mm-hmm.
and it worked out well. Right. So I think it's not a bad thing to take a year off and get some experience in life.
Yeah. I mean, it was a really unrealistic expectation of me when I was a kid. When I was in high school, I volunteered at a TV station because all I wanted to do was work in broadcasting, right? Sports broadcasting more specifically. And everybody told me, well, you got to go to school for that. You got to go to school for that. And I remember there was only one person in my life at the time, and it was the guy who was running the TV station, the local TV station. I would go volunteer and go cover hockey games. I would do play-by-play. I would do all these things. And I remember when I was applying to school, he was like, dude, why are you going to school? It's like, I never went to school. And I was like, yeah, well, I got to go get a diploma. And he's like, you don't though. He's like, I never went to school and I do this job. He's like, you could stay home, like work your job at the grocery store and just volunteer here. And he's like, in 2 years, you'll have saved money because you'll live with your parents and worked. And he's like, I'll have taught you everything you need to know and you'll be able to go out and get a job. And you'll be better suited than anyone who went to college. And I remember going home and I was kind of excited about that and like talking to teachers. And I remember one of my teachers, I won't name his name, but he's like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And I was like, the stupidest thing you've ever heard? He's like, yeah. He's like, you got to go to college and get your diploma. And I was like,
yeah.
And then like everyone else around me was basically like, "You're an idiot if you do that. Like, stay home and work it." And I was like, "Well, I guess I'm stupid then. I guess I better go to college and
Yeah.
sit in class for the next year." The ironic part was when I went to college, the second year of college was literally working at a radio station. So it was the job I would have done like without burning tens of thousands of dollars on school. So it was like a massive, massive mistake. Probably one of the biggest mistakes of my life was that I did that. But that
Yeah.
was a really unrealistic expectation or standard that got set by all of society. It wasn't just like, my dad was kind of like,
Hmm.
well, he's like, if you live here, you're paying rent. That was kind of his thing. He's like, I'm not going to let you live here for free. And I was like, okay, whatever. Um,
Yeah.
my parents were kind of like ho humming. They really wanted me to go to college though, but they kind of left it to me. But like so much of society was just pushing it. But you can imagine
Yeah.
like just coming out of school. Now I'm in tens of thousands of dollars in debt. Can't get a job in debt.
Tens of $1,000s in debt. And then those jobs that you want to apply for, you need experience for,
Yeah, they're
like
like,
radio, TV,
yeah.
all that stuff.
Oh, great, you went to school. Do you have any experience in the real world? Well, no, because I went to school. Yeah, that
Yeah.
is kind of the funny part. But like, you can just imagine the mental strain on kids coming out now because now they're coming out with way more debt. Some
Way more
upwards of
debt. Yeah.
like six figures of debt, and there are again, all the jobs are entry level. Like the amount of people who come to the place that I worked at, like the corporate world, you only need a high
Hmm.
school diploma. Like that's your barrier to entry. It's just your high school diploma. They come out of
Hmm.
university with a degree. They come out with $100,000 in debt, and they go into a job where they're managed by somebody who has a high school diploma, who
Yeah.
decided, no, I'm not going to school. I'm going to spend, the next 4 or 5 years working. That person has now built up enough money. They're either close to buying a house or they already have. They've got a car. They've got no student debt. And now they're bossing around the person who went to school to get an arts degree. Now, this
Yeah.
is obviously not something that's like hard and fast. Like if you want to be a doctor or a lawyer or like an accountant, you should probably go to university. But if you're
Yeah.
just
There's
going to,
certain things.
yeah, for sure. But if you're just getting an arts degree, it's pointless. It
Yeah. I
really
don't want
is.
an uneducated brain surgeon,
No, you don't.
Not really.
Yeah, I asked my back surgeon if he could get
It's
me a
like, well, I've
job.
got experience.
Yeah. So that is a real mental strain when it comes to the anchoring effect. The first instinct you ever have, first thing you're ever told, go to university or college. Yeah, you got to go to school. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, okay, so this is the next one. Feeling stuck or trapped. Well, debt will do that. Nothing makes you feel
Yeah.
more trapped than debt. The
Hmm.
anchoring effect can also cause you to feel stuck or trapped in your current situation. If you're unable to move away from the initial anchor point, it can become difficult to make any positive changes or take risks. By repeating this pattern over and over, you may find yourself in an endless downward spiral of poor decisions. So, for example, if a person's settling for lower wages due to anchoring, they may find themselves in a cycle of struggling to make ends meet and being happy with their job.
We've for years anchored ourselves in this, like, we're in the middle class and we can only make this much money and we have to do these types of jobs and all these things, right? You anchor yourself into that, and the truth is, like, the potential is endless what you can actually do. It's just you gotta get past that biasy and work towards it.
Yeah. The truth in the world, and this is something you don't get taught growing up, is that it's never been easier. There's never been an easier time in history to become wealthy. Like never,
Hmm.
there's like I know people freak out and they're like, "Oh, the millionaires and billionaires," but it has actually never been easier to become wealthy. Like you can literally become wealthy in the basement of your house. Now, it still requires a ton of work and a ton of knowledge and, consistency and all these different things. Like you still got to put a lot into it. But back in like you go back like a couple hundred years ago, if you were born
Hmm.
into poverty, you stayed in poverty. There was no like pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and getting out. And I hate
Right.
that term, like pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, because it's so cliche and overused. But it's true. Like if you work really hard at something, and you also work intelligently and you're consistent, then yeah, you can pull yourself out of some pretty bad situations. And
Hmm.
when you're growing up, that's not at all what you're taught. Again, back to the school thing. You're taught, no, you go to school, and what's the next step?
Go to more school.
Well, maybe go to school, you get a job. and you work there
Yeah.
and you get a
That's right.
steady paycheck and you work 9 to 5 and you buy a house and you meet your spouse
Yeah.
and you start a family and then you work your job for 30 years and then you retire
And then you get to enjoy your
and
life.
then you enjoy your life. Yeah.
Yeah.
What it's really like just fascinating to see that we still push 9 to 5, the whole idea of like the 9 to 5 on people. Granted, there are people who love it. They want the consistency of working 9 to 5. And that's cool. If that's your thing, by all means, go for it. But there are so many people who are so dissatisfied with a 9 to 5
Mhm.
job. Myself being one of them, you as well, obviously. But we know so many people like our last episodes, like Tim, basically all our
Mhm.
episodes. Ryan, like you go on the list, on down the list of
Yeah.
guests we've had on this show who are just like
Brickman.
not,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, Brickman, like tons of people, just not into that sort of lifestyle. And there's nothing that will trap you more than like student debt and getting stuck in a 9 to 5 job that pays you a decent paycheck every 2 weeks. That is
Yeah.
the definition of getting stuck or trapped.
And high mortgage, high other debts like revolving credit, all that stuff, right?
Yeah. I mean, imagine just taking like a bigger view of this. Like, let's just look at what we're telling people to do. These are the anchors that we're tying people to, kids specifically.
Mhm.
Go to go to school for whatever, 14 years, which is fine.
Mhm.
Get your high school diploma. And then by the way, in the years where you can work the hardest, you have the most energy to work the hardest, we want to strap you to a desk in a classroom and teach you stuff that in most cases you don't need to know. And by the way, we're going to charge you a massive premium for the privilege of doing that. And you're not going to be able to work during those times other than the summers. So you're going to take a lot of dad on and you're going to come out and you're still in your prime earning years, but now you have to scramble to find a job that's probably beneath your skill set.
Mhm.
And oh, by the way, we've made everything crazy expensive. So
Yeah.
good luck. And what you want to live with your parents? What are you, a loser? What are you doing? Why? What do you mean? You still here, huh? At 28, huh? Still here. Like that's the
Yeah.
hilarious part is that we then turn around and criticize people because they can't get out on their own after we've basically
Right.
anchored them with all of this stuff. It's pretty wild.
Sad state of affairs.
So the last one's financial consequences. We've talked a lot about this, but this is back from the article. Relying on anchors can lead to regrettable financial decisions like overpaying for a house because the initial listing price, the anchor skewed perception of its value, and these can have long-term repercussions. Obviously, if you consistently fall victim to this cognitive bias, you'll often feel dissatisfaction or regret over your choices, leading to stress and self-doubt. For example, consistently accepting underpaid jobs due to the anchoring can lead to financial stress and feelings of being undervalued. Eventually, these feelings can pile up and lead to more serious mental health issues such as depression or anxiety.
Mhm.
Anyways, so we've touched on all these things, obviously. Like you and I have made no bones about it. The biggest mistakes we made was, in our early years, like choosing to go to school young, choosing to go to school with no direction, like not working as hard as we should have in our prime working years. And that's sort of left us on this path where we're in our, well, in our 30s and
Or
40s and
Mhm.
just busting ass to try to kind of play catch up. Right.
Yeah.
And like you and I both, it's crazy what we work now, considering we have like families. We're at a point where like most people before us were kind of comfortable with where they are. They were
Mhm.
good in their career, and we're not where we want to be yet. And a lot of it has been kind of. I only feel like I've started to shake off my anchor bias over the last 5 years. I would say because I
Yeah.
was anchored to like, oh, I need to work 9 to 5 and get a steady paycheck so I can get a mortgage and get a house, and I really believed in these things, and now I don't believe in them for me at least.
Yeah. Well, and I think what I've noticed from you and definitely what I've had in the, probably the past 7 years or something like that is that when you shake those anchors off and you start actually looking at things more clearly and then working hard towards the goals and things that you want, that you start getting approached
Yeah.
You start getting approached by other people saying, "Hey, we want you for this and we want you for that." And then all of a sudden you guys start making decisions on like, what do I want to do? Right.
Yeah.
But it's interesting how those opportunities come up when you start shedding your biases.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about shedding your biases. So how do you actually avoid an anchor bias? So in the article, they mention a few things, and basically what they're saying is the things that you need to do. One of them is you have to seek multiple perspectives. So before deciding what you're going to do, gather information from diverse sources to get a well-rounded view. Now, this doesn't always
Mhm.
work. I mentioned in the example of me going away to school that I went to multiple people, got very diverse opinion. I just picked the wrong one.
Right.
That's the tricky part. If you get diverse opinions or sources on things, you got to decide, well, what's actually the right one. Um,
Yeah.
so I think this is an interesting one because you talked about doing research when it comes to a product, right? You're getting like multiple reviews on something.
Mhm.
I don't feel that people go do this with a lot of things, go get multiple perspectives on things. And if they
Yeah.
do, a lot of times they'll seek perspectives from people who are very similarly aligned.
I've started trying to get those perspectives from other people, but then I've also stopped caring so much about what other people's opinions are. So I know that's kind of contradictory. I like to listen to all the different options and things that people are saying. I like to get people's opinions,
Mhm.
but I don't necessarily just take their opinions and roll with it like I did when I was younger.
Well, that goes into the next thing. The next point is be mindful when making decisions. So take your
Mhm.
time. Don't rush hastily into making a choice based on the first impression that you receive. So basically, your anchor bias. Take a few moments to analyze the various factors at play, considering different outcomes, and weigh all options available. This will help you make reasoned and balanced decisions. The biggest things that I did in life, I did seek multiple perspectives on them, and in some cases, chose the wrong one to go with. Obviously, the school being the big one. Um, But that I think that actually has led. So a lot of people have lived this, right, over the last 10, 20 years. And I think this is why, like, people always talk about institutional erosion. Like, we've lost trust in media, education, politicians, all these different things. I think this actually plays into it, is that people are now mindful and do seek multiple perspectives on things. And when they
Mhm.
start to understand that, oh, well, this person's been wrong a whole bunch, like maybe I should find a new perspective. Like the media is a good example. The media has never had less trust because they've been
Yeah.
so wrong about so many things. People have moved on to other things, other perspectives. And a lot of it is alternative media who also get it wrong quite often. So people are, I think, kind of looking for another source there too. But I know for me that I always try to live by a rule of like, I'll trust you to make one mistake. And then from then on, I'll always like, I'll be skeptical. But everybody makes mistakes and everybody gets things wrong. But it's like, are you getting
Mhm.
things wrong honestly, or are you not telling me the truth? And if somebody's not telling you the truth or giving you an opinion that's just not correct, like not honest, then that's somebody that disregard that. But if it's somebody who's just getting something wrong, like they're figuring it out just like you, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, like talking to somebody who knows what they're talking about, like being educated about these things is important. And I don't mean like they went to school. I mean like they've lived it or experienced it and that kind of thing. But
Mhm.
yeah, like taking in information and like actually processing is very important if you want to shatter an anchor bias. Um,
Yeah.
and I don't know if you find this to be true, but I know for me, like any initial feeling that I have on something, I always also make assumptions about it. And like there's that old cliche about assumptions, make an ass out
Yeah.
of you and me. Um, but whenever I get a piece of information now, I just constantly question like, is it actually valid? Is it correct? And I don't know if that's me just being a crotchety old man or if that's good. Um, but yeah, like I always try to not let that skew my perspective on things.
No, that's good. I think in the last few years I think people have become more awake to this, to be honest. And I don't know if that's like just more availability to information, or if it's because of the distrust that we've had in, distrustful things that have happened in the media and with politics and everything over the last several years. But I find that people are definitely a little more aware of the decisions that they're making and not just taking people's first opinions.
All right, let's recap. This is the end. We can get out of here. So let's recap. While the anchoring effect is a natural cognitive process, it can skew the way you interpret information and lead to poor decision making. You can mitigate the influence of anchor bias by being aware of its presence, being mindful when making decisions, and considering different outcomes and perspectives. This can help you make more informed and beneficial decisions, which is good for your mental and overall well-being. This line, the middle line, you can mitigate the influence of anchor bias by being aware of its presence, being mindful when making decisions, and considering different outcomes and perspectives. If the world did that, holy shit, we'd be in a better place.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like we've got less and less and less of that lately.
Yeah, like
people admitting they're wrong and listening to others. Yeah, it's just not happening anymore.
No. I don't. Yeah, I mean, no one will admit that they're wrong despite overwhelming evidence that they were wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. We should all try and be aware of our own anchor biases and try to consider other people's opinions and perspectives, because chances are we are probably wrong.